You are listening to the Community Radio Show on WLEE News Talk 990. We're doing a recap of a friend of ours here in studio, Ali Faruk, and his experience of his journey to Hajj that he was recently back from. Numbers to call if anybody has any questions or comments is 804-788-0990, or you can call toll free from anywhere in the country, 1-877-953-3990.
We're also streaming live.
Oh, of course, always streaming live. WLEE990.am. I actually just checked. We got a couple people that's on the feed there.
Streaming.
And of course, make sure if you would like to check out the archives post show, if you missed one or you want to go back and recap what we were discussing, you can go to youtube.com/community radio show, and we keep a pretty complete archive there that's always being updated, and the latest greatest. So
yeah, you can check out the stream because I got dressed up because with Ali.
I gotta teach you how to tie.
No, listen. no bow tie. I should have done the bow tie because the minister is coming. No, but with Ali, when I chatted with him yesterday at work over the text, I gave him the info of when he was going to come in and all that kind of stuff, and I said, all right, so are we confirmed? And his reply back was yes. Get ready for the realness. So I was just so with nice. With Ali, it's got to be real from the way you dress to But I think he's still recovering from his trip because he didn't show up in his three-piece.
It's Saturday. Nobody wears that on Saturday.
Three-piece suit. Just it's kind of hot.
He's sharp today though.
Yeah, as always. So, well, we were before the break. We were talking about kind of what you were expecting to kind of get out of Hajj, and I think it's hard for people to understand is, first of all, what we see or what's shown in the news is just simply the last rites or the last circling around the Kaaba, the black cube. And so I think the misconception is people think that, that's just what it is. Muslims go there, and for however long they stay there, all they're doing is just going around the circle.
Yeah,
and it's not. And it's just that you have certain things that you have to do in certain places you have to be at certain times.
Yeah.
And
it's funny, that was my, until maybe a few days before the Hajj, that was my idea too. I was like, the biggest part of Hajj is that you go in a circle around the Kaaba. And doing that is a beautiful thing, and I can talk a lot about that. But actually, and I'm going to keep this very simple for folks who don't know the terminology, the Hajj, the actual Hajj, is only a few days, maybe about 4 or 5 days, and it starts with camping out in the desert. You have to camp out in the desert for 5 days in a tent. Then you have to go and spend a day in the heat on Mount Arafat praying and asking forgiveness. And that is actually the core of Hajj.
Right.
Is you spend all day in this tent, no AC, and praying. And that was probably the most beautiful part of Hajj for me. Everything else is really hard, but Arafah, which some people say is the hardest part, was actually very nice. The heat didn't bother me at all.
I mean, literally, it is the desert.
It's the desert.
It's hot. There's sand, and other than the water that's brought in on kind of the the Gatorade containers, it's literally the desert.
It's the desert, and when you're camped out at Mina, that's the desert, and people don't realize
it's cold at night. It's hot in the day.
It's difficult. It's really hard, and we've made it with we've got modern amenities, but it's still the desert and desert spirituality. This is a source for people who study theology or religion. Desert spirituality is a very fascinating topic amongst all the religions, and the effect that living in a stark environment has on your relationship with the Almighty. And so when you're in a place where it's so unpredictable and where very often you have nothing and you have no choice but to say, please God, just let this work out, that changes who you are. And that's what you learn. So you camp out in the desert for 5 days. You have to spend a day praying in the desert. No AC, nothing. And then you have to sleep in the open desert. So you've already been camped out for 4 nights in the desert, but that's in a tent. But on one night, you have to actually just sleep in the open desert. And like I said, in the Hajj, what it did for me, and everyone who goes has a different takeaway from it, but for me it was like peeling away an onion. Slowly, as you go through the Hajj, the layers of who you are and the barriers you've built around yourself, like I'm an American, I'm middle class, I do this, I have a master's, all these things that I say is who I am. God slowly peels it away until you realize you're just another person on a mat in the desert. Right. And it doesn't matter that you're an American, how much money you have, what kind of Hajj package you paid. Everybody has to do that. It doesn't matter if you're the king of Saudi Arabia. you have to sleep in the open desert, 2 inches next to the other person. And that was wild for me. Like when I went to bed that night, we got to this place. It's called Muzdalifah.
Right. Let me ask you a question before you come back to that. It just you were talking about that peeling away of the onion and the notion of being out there and really having no one other than God to call upon. So was that a process for you to kind of completely immerse yourself in that? Because speaking from personal experience, sometimes it kind of takes a little bit of warming up, if you will, to get to that spiritual state, while others come there and they're already just ready
to do it,
ready to go. So can you talk a little bit about that?
And so this has to do, I think, more for us as Americans. So if you're an American, we all already know this. We're incredibly blessed. We live in an amazing country with so many things. Even those of us who are struggling have amazing resources and amazing things around us that make our lives easier that people in most of the world don't. And so for me, that means that our spirituality, we have this idea that we control our surroundings. Whereas if you encounter a poor person from India, and I encountered a lot, they don't have that. They can't control their surroundings. So their faith is incredibly strong. It's really inspiring. And so you'll see, and I saw a lot of people from the third world, really, really, really poor people, who are sitting and praying in just the worst conditions. They don't have an apartment they live in. They live in a tent in a corner of a city during Hajj. And there they are, they have no personal space. People are walking, cars are driving, there's trash all around them. And yet you can see on their face that they're not fazed by it. That they are at peace with where they are, who they are, and that they're there just to build their relationship with God. And they're not causing anybody any problems. They're just in their little corner. And that's inspiring. And so for an American, the Hajj has parts of it built into it that slowly help prepare. So even if you didn't prepare, of course, everyone has to prepare.
Right.
So if you're not even thinking about it, I don't know if you'll benefit. But there are, slowly, the Hajj doesn't start right away. You get there a few days early, and you have time to just absorb being in this new place, being in Mecca. And then once you start traveling to Mina, you have even more time to prepare. Because again, in Mina, you're camped out in the desert in tents, but tents are different. The American tents are much nicer than the Indian tents. And then finally, after a few days, you have to go to Muzdalifah and camp out in the open desert and sleep in the open desert. Nothing above you, nothing around you, no AC. And that's, I think, the ultimate. That's where by that time, you're sort of ready. And it's actually, that was the best night of sleep I had the whole trip. Not nearly as good as sleeping in my own bed, which was, it's just so amazing.
Do you stay up? Do you kind of have this internal battle between staying up and making the most of your time there with spiritual praying and all that versus I actually do need to get some sleep because I'm not going to be able to.
So there is that tension, but in many parts of Hajj, it's there's no reason to stay up late and do worship because those places have no significance aside from that you have to be there. Right. So, like for example, when you're in Mina, there's nothing special about Mina. Like it's not like the Haram, it's not like the Kaaba where every prayer is like $100,000, 100,000 multiplied by 100,000 the reward. And so you should sleep, and it's encouraged that you sleep and rest because Hajj, even for the healthiest of us, and I consider myself young and virulent, it was difficult.
Virulent. We have to come back.
It was hard. It was really, really difficult, and
so you got to bring your A game.
Exactly. I got very sick, and I still have a sore throat. We're on week 4 or something, or week 3.
I know. Thank you for telling us that because we should have brought in the mask.
We're all like 6 inches away from each other.
We're all trying to. If you see, I'm no longer in the video feed because I'm trying to get away from him. And Bukhari's got this nagging cough from 8 years ago that's still been
still doing it.
It's crazy.
And so once you do that and you sleep in the open desert, you have a really great appreciation for humanity. Nothing hits you like that. Even in Tawaf, which is where you're circling around the Kaaba, and that's a totally different experience. There's I went to sleep around 10, and when I got to our area where we're supposed to sleep in the open desert, there were only 40 or 50 of us there. Okay. And it's what you'd imagine. It's like sand and gravel, and the only thing you see is mountains and a bathroom they had built. It's kind of funny to actually see this modern bathroom in the middle of the open desert.
It's little light posts.
Exactly, with the light posts. And then I woke up at 2 in the morning. Just, sometimes people wake up. And I get up and I look around. And as far as I can see, the ground is absolutely covered in people. You can't even walk. Like, you have to walk on people's mattresses. You have to,
You're like stepping over people.
You're stepping
and then
over
trying
people.
Not to
There's no
crush the dude that's afterwards.
Exactly. There is no room, and again, 5 million people have to sleep there, and it's so awe-inspiring that you have no choice but to, one, acknowledge just the greatness of God, because he has inspired people to come do this, and he's brought people together in a way that, humans, we don't do that. We don't like to have so many people around us. Right. We like to create walls between ourselves, whether it's physical walls or, economic walls or ethnic walls, and we keep people out, and we only allow people in that make us comfortable. But it's a beautiful experience for God to force all these people together and realize that we're all the same. We're all just trying to sleep. We're all just trying to pray. And it was really nice. There are always really ugly parts of everything. Yeah. So while we as humans like to build walls around ourselves against each other, we as humans are also not very nice to each other. Right. And so in Muzdalifah, the lines for the bathroom were a completely different experience. And you're talking like 2-hour, 3-hour lines. And people, again, the bathroom is the one place where there are lines. That you can't, because it just doesn't work. It's too messy there. You don't want to get into a fight outside the bathroom stall. And
right.
Let me take you back for a second. After sleeping that night in Mina and out in the open, I was wondering why I couldn't hear myself. After sleeping that night, in the open, how was it the next morning when you have to make another transition, to another place? Yeah. How was the interaction with the people? How did the crowd move, from that one spot as this, huge mass? How?
Yeah, and so there are buses that take people, and so there are buses constantly, actually all night, because again, there are 5 million people, and so when I went to bed, there were huge buses all night coming in and out, and just the noise.
Because you can hear them, because they got diesel engines.
They have diesel engines, and so you hear them all night nonstop, and then you hear them all day. So that noise never goes away. So there are buses absolutely constantly going. But the next morning, those of us who could walked.
Okay.
Back to where we needed. Again, that was maybe 3 kilometers, maybe 4. And we were great. We were pumped. We were ready to go. And so the walk back was actually kind of celebratory. It was almost like a parade. The people, those of us who could walk, because as much as you can, that's why I tell people, go when you're young. You do not. The only people who really have to go on the bus are the elderly. If you cannot walk, or for whatever reason, or you might be disabled. But waiting in the bus, you may be stuck in the bus for hours, not moving an inch.
Right. When my mom went, because she had a disc and a problem with her foot, so she said she went on a bus. It's just because she simply couldn't.
Exactly. So it was a luxury to walk, and we loved it, and it was very celebratory. The next morning, people were pumped. It really felt like a parade as we walked back to our camp in the desert.
Gotcha.
So you're listening to the community radio show on WLEE News Talk 990. Yep. Sorry, we're so engrossed in the conversation we don't give out the numbers, but please, yes. Do call 788-0990. Yep. We're talking to Ali Faruk about his experience to Hajj. We do have a call. Before I get that, I want to say that, it's fascinating because every single person that I've spoken to about their experience at Hajj always discusses, there's a spiritual part and there's all these kind of logistical issues, and yet none of them ever regret going. And,
I've never heard of anybody
regardless of, you can take the person that had the worst experience dealing with people, luggage getting lost, anything you want to think of, and yet they say that it was the most moving spiritual experience that they had gone through. And it's really hard to understand that, I think, particularly coming from the Western developed world, just because we have so many amenities,
luxuries,
that we've just come to expect, and get used to. So we're gonna go to line one. Is Julia? Let's see if I can do this right. Julia, welcome to the community radio show.
Welcome.
Hi. This is a very interesting conversation. I'm really enjoying it.
Oh, thanks for calling in.
I have a quick question about what's the experience for women? I know there's a separation of the sexes. I was just wondering if you get more information on that. I'm very curious.
Okay. That's a great question. And so first of all, everything I've talked about, the men and women are together. And so the only time that's different is when we're camped out in the desert. The women have their own tents, and they are actually right next to the men's tents, because they try to keep groups together. So if I went by myself, but if I had gone with my wife or my sister, her tent would be right across from mine because they don't want people getting split up like that.
Right.
So to answer your question, there's two experiences. There's the experience of the women on Hajj, and then there's the experience of the women in Saudi Arabia. The experience of the women on Hajj is, I think, almost the same as it is for men, because they were with us everywhere the entire time. And so when you're camped out in the open desert, actually the men and women are literally sleeping right next to each other.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, my brother-in-law, who I went with, Sammy, at night, he had these large Turkish women that kept rolling over on dinner.
Wow.
Oh, man.
So they're very close. And the other thing is when you get to the Kaaba, which is the holy mosque in Mecca, the men and women pray right next to each other, which is a very different experience from every other mosque or every other masjid. And it didn't bother anybody. It wasn't a big deal. Nobody made a huge deal. And it felt I didn't even notice it until I noticed it.
Right.
Like it's not like you walk in, you're like, oh my God, there's women. You really don't notice it until you're sitting there. You're like, the men and women are right next to each other, and it's not a big deal. No one says it. And so it was actually quite beautiful. Then there's the experience of women in Saudi Arabia, and this I can't speak too much about. I can only say that Saudi Arabia, I personally have a lot of problems with Saudi Arabia. I don't think it reflects Islam very well. I think there's a lot of hypocrisy in that culture and in that society, and so women are not treated well.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know of any specific stories or anything. I think you'd have to talk to. My wife went on Hajj a couple years ago, and she had some not good experiences of things like just being ignored when she would try to buy things, of just being blatantly like if she would try to go do something, they would serve all the men first and then deign to, and so it's a ridiculous culture. I'm sure I'm offending a lot of people.
No, I have some stats as far as we have another call. Let me give the stats. The official stat is that there were 64% were male and 35% were female. But I think to Julia's question, the obligation applies both to men and women.
Yeah.
And so there's no from a Islamic perspective, in the eyes of God, men don't get any greater merit points with God for doing the pilgrimage versus women. It's equal on both.
Right.
On both
at that point, you're at the level of a human being.
Right.
That's it.
And you're just fulfilling a commandment that has been ordained to. Now, I must say, there are exceptions to having to perform the Hajj. And there's all these conditions and stuff. But just generally speaking, it's an obligation to perform it once in a lifetime. So we're going to go to line 2. Is it Alim? Alim. I'm sorry, Alim. Go ahead. Welcome to the Community Radio Show.
Yes, my question was if you can ask the brother if he had the opportunity to ride on their transit system, and what did he think about that?
Okay.
Thank you. Assalamu
alaikum. That's a great question. And so, as you go through Hajj,
hold on one second.
Oh, sure.
Sorry. Our engineers keeping me on task. Let's go to a commercial. We're just so engrossed in this. We can come back about the transportation.
Got to worship the dollar.
Hey, listen. Hey, man, we got bills to pay. Selvin's not cheap. He's not cheap over here. So you're listening to the Community Radio Show on WLEE News Talk 990. Our number is 7880990. We're going to come back on the other side of the break and pick up this fascinating conversation.